Good afternoon from Manila, and welcome to our session on women in the green economy, integrating gender equality in building a sustainable future for all. I'm Mitzi Borromeo, your moderator for this session. Today, the world faces many challenges, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, climate impacts, economic inequality requiring social transformation and solutions at a scale we have never seen before. As the transition to a green and blue economy gains momentum, women and girls must be at the heart of the shift, leading and participating at all levels. The video you just saw highlighted the fact that the pace of transitions is too slow and too male. How do we ensure that women benefit and are not left behind? For the next hour and a half, we will explore how the transition to green and blue economies affects existing inequalities. We will also discuss the support needed for women's participation in these economies. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available at www.adb.org on September 27th. Now, let me introduce our brilliant panel today. Joining us virtually from various parts of the globe, we have Dave Woodward, Vice President of LinkedIn, Helen Ogren, recently appointed the Director for Climate Change for the Swedish Ministry for the Environment and former Ocean Ambassador for Sweden. Karen Mopasua, Director of the Land Resources Division of the Pacific Community and IFOAM Organics International President. Ajay Shah, Founder and CEO of Frontiers Market India, and Samantha Hong, Chief of the Gender Equality Thematic Group at the Asian Development Bank, or ADB. Welcome, everyone. Good to be here with you all. I look forward to a thought-provoking and very enriching discussion. So the future of work for women in the Asia-Pacific region is full of opportunities and challenges, particularly given the climate change emergency, digital acceleration, automation, and in some countries, a shortage of skilled workers. In the transition to a green economy, it's absolutely crucial to provide women with the skills that power these jobs, or green skills. So, Dave, let me start with you. Earlier this year, LinkedIn released its inaugural and insightful Global Green Skills Report 2022. Would you share with us just some of the key findings from the report?
Sure, Mitzi. And first, let me start just by saying it's an honor to be on this distinguished panel, and I really look forward to discussing these very important topics. So in response to your question, you're absolutely right. LinkedIn released its inaugural Global Green Skills Report in February of this year. And in it, the team identified hundreds of green skills from our taxonomy of over 35,000 skills that are necessary for sustainable economic activity. We've mapped those skills onto every job, and we're measuring how intensely any job uses those green skills. And just to be clear at the outset, in terms of the report's scope, it covered 5 economies in the APAC region, namely Singapore, India, China, Australia, and New Zealand. So in regards to the key findings in the report, there are 3 that I'd like to highlight. The first is that our analysis found we're falling short in developing the human capital we need to make the transition to a green economy. Our data shows that green skills are increasingly prevalent in the global workforce, but they aren't growing at the rate we need to meet the challenge. Now, an insight from the report that underscores this is that globally, green talent increased from 9.6% in 2015 to 13.3% in 2021. But demand for talent is outpacing supply. So while job postings requiring green skills grew at roughly 8% annually since 2015, the share of green talent grew at roughly 6% annually in the same period. So you can see the delta there. Another report insight is that in the past year, about 10% of job postings on LinkedIn requiring particular skills have explicitly required at least one green skill. So a second key finding worth noting is that our data shows gender and regional inequities are quickly emerging. So a report site that highlights this is that in 2021, there were only 62 women for every 100 men considered green talent globally. And that's a number that has been stagnant since about 2015. Now, over the last 6 years, 66% of transitions into green jobs have been made by men. Another insight I think worth calling out is that our data shows green skills development in high and middle income countries far outpaces growth in lower income countries. So the average job in the US, UK, and Australia uses 2 to 3x more green skills than the global average. And this only further reinforces that wealthier countries are already at an advantage, and we need to accelerate green skills adoption in developing countries. The third key report finding I'll mention relates to the following, which is we're used to thinking that greening the planet is done by a limited subset of occupations. But to meet our global climate targets, just about every job needs to incorporate some green skills. So in our analysis, we looked at quote unquote green jobs, such as a solar technician, greening jobs, meaning jobs in the process of becoming green, such as a compliance manager. And then the last bucket was green potential jobs. And so those are jobs that require some green skills, such as a technical sales representative. So it's not just the jobs we traditionally think of as green jobs, like solar panel installer or wind turbine technician. It can and must be a far larger universe of workers. Now, a related insight from our report is that green skilled professionals remain most in demand in three sectors in particular, and they are manufacturing, education, and corporate services. But we need to think about incorporating green skills into nearly all jobs, not just jobs we traditionally think of as green jobs. A last insight worth sharing is that we also see in our data that green skills are making their way into traditional industries and industries particularly important for developing Asia and women workers. So, for example, in the garment industry, sustainable fashion was the fastest growing green skill globally with an average growth rate of 90% from 2016 to 2020. Traditional fashion jobs such as designers, stylists, and merchandisers are increasingly applying sustainable fashion skills. And according to ILO, women account for 80% of workers in the garment sector workforce. So we need to make sure women have green skills to stay competitive with that industry. Mitzi?
Thank you, Dave. Indeed, what great insights. Thank you for this tool. It is really very helpful for us, showing what's really needed to make this transition to a green economy. Now, demand for green jobs is outpacing supply, and all jobs will need to integrate green skills and eventually evolve into green jobs. So, this transition will require everyone's talent and contributions. Let me go over to Sam now. So, we just heard from Dave that the green gender gap has not improved since 2015, and that globally in 2021, only 62 women for every 100 men considered green talent. So, this number has remained stagnant since 2015. This shows that progress for women's participation in the green economy and green jobs are not guaranteed. Sam, what do you think countries and development actors should do to ensure that women benefit from green jobs?
Thank you, Mitzi, and really good to see you again. To answer your question, I think there are really three broad areas of intervention that are required. So first is we need to remove barriers to female labor force participation across the board. Secondly, we need to provide women with the right skills, as Dave was alluding to before. And third, we need to invest in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths education for girls and women. So I'd like to talk about each of these in turn. So firstly, in terms of barriers to women's labor market participation, it's important for us to recognize that green jobs are not always quality jobs. And so policies and programs that promote green jobs need to recognize and respond to the interaction between environmental sustainability, decent work, and gender equality. And for women to be able to access green jobs, the barriers to female labor force participation must be removed. So this means we need to create jobs for women that provide equal pay for work of equal value, for example, provide them benefits such as parental leave and employment security, a safe working condition. So that might include policies to address sexual harassment in the workplace, for example, and also provide them with equal opportunities for training and advancement. Another important factor is that lack of childcare in reality also constrains women's labor force participation as well as their access to training. So if we're serious about inclusion of women, why can't provision of quality and affordable childcare be part of green economy planning? So for the second area on skills, analysis by the World Resources Institute found that green investments generally create more jobs per million US dollars of investment than unsustainable investments. So transitioning to low carbon green economies can be a huge force for job creation for women, but this means providing them with the right skills to enter the sectors that were traditionally dominated by men. And this means governments and development partners need to identify the gender gaps in relation to green job skills and offer the right opportunities for women to upgrade their relevant technical and entrepreneurial skills. So third, the area of STEM, which is a very important one, because we know that gender gaps in STEM begin in early childhood. They then widen in secondary school. And by the time you get to higher and TVET education, they're already very pronounced. Just to cite some examples, according to the recent 2022 World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report, almost all across all graduates in STEM fields, only 1.7% of ICT graduates are women compared to about 8% of men. And if we look at engineering and manufacturing, it's only 6.6% for women compared to almost 25% for men. But interestingly, the same report found that data from Coursera noted that in terms of online enrollment, the gender gaps are actually smaller, even though the skilling preference still follow traditional gender patterns. So we really need to change the social and gender norms that can continue to be reflected in our curriculum. We need to provide girls with the right mentorship and leadership programs, work with parents to address their biases that may prevent them from encouraging their daughters to enter STEM education and careers. And lastly, along the lines of what Dave was talking about, it's not only about technical skills to shift to green technologies, but there are also broader skills that will contribute to green jobs, such as environmental awareness, problem solving, and broad entrepreneurship skills. And these can also contribute to other challenges or opportunities such as nature-based solutions, ecosystem restoration, and sustainable agriculture, all of which can create employment at community level and improve resilience to climate impacts and directly benefit women. So at the end of the day, it's about creating an equitable STEM ecosystem for women and girls, I think, Mitzi. Back to you.
Thank you, Sam. Indeed, education still needs a lot of improvement and a lot that must be done so that we can really push gender equality forward. And speaking of education, let's hear now perspective from Christina Kwok, who is a research director with Unbounded Associates and a gender, education, and climate change specialist. She talks about how we can generate opportunities for women in the green economy. Let's watch this.
We need to recognize that for the green economy to be more gender inclusive, we need to ensure that opportunities to acquire the knowledge and to develop the skills for green jobs is also gender inclusive. This means greater investment in girls' and women's green skills education is paramount. Such an education includes the STEM education, or the science, technology, engineering, and math education that many green jobs are likely to emerge from. But it also includes a broader breadth of green skills like systems thinking and engaging in collective action that will be vital for broader sustainability transformations.
So, Christina, they're reinforcing what Sam said earlier on the need to focus on STEM education. Now, let's move over to Karen. Karen, in the Pacific region, there are significant gender disparities in labor market participation and wages, occupational segregation by gender, and differences in the types of work that women and men perform. For example, in Samoa, the labor force participation rate for women is 23% compared with 58% for men. So can the green and blue economies provide opportunities to increase women's labor market participation? And also, Karen, would you tell us which sectors would be most viable for such participation?
Thanks, Mitzi. In short, yes, absolutely. But I'd also like to note to start with that the low labour force participation in the Pacific doesn't mean that women aren't participating actively in the economy. And as an indicator, it really doesn't recognise how important what we would call the Pacific Way and what probably the rest of the world refers to as the sharing economy plays in the Pacific. Given our unique geography, economy, and culture, there's sometimes a limited relevance and applicability of strategies and approaches to women's economic empowerment and engagement in the labour force that originate outside of the region. And COVID, for example, really highlighted how much our Pacific food system relies on sharing and bartering and other forms of exchanges, like cultural exchanges. So we might need some new indicators when we're talking about women's engagement in the economy in various ways. Women in the Pacific currently participate in both the formal and informal sectors, fulfilling really important roles in agriculture, fisheries, cultural industries, and of course, hospitality and service industries. On the food system side, men tend to dominate in commercial agriculture, and women perform a greater share of shore-based harvesting, like collecting shellfish or non-timber forest products, processing, working in pack houses, and of course, subsistence farming, as was said. And often, as also has been said, this work is often low paid, insecure, they're unregulated sectors, and there's few legal protections with limited social safety nets, and of course, poor access to financial services. So while there are really big opportunities in agriculture and fisheries, and I would say cultural industries as well, from the production end right through the value chain, before we encourage women to enter the labour force, we need to make sure that they are decent, safe, and meaningful jobs. And some examples of what I mean there, lifetime prevalence of intimate partner violence in the Pacific is 47% averaged across our countries, compared to a global average of 20% in 2021. And research has indicated that income does not necessarily reduce the risks faced by women. In fact, it can increase the risk of harm and problems that women face at home. So I think it's really important when we're talking about how we create jobs and engage people in the formal economy or engage women, that we're also looking at how we address these broader sociocultural issues. Violence against women contributes to absenteeism. And so also many families would not encourage their daughters to work on a farm because it's not safe to be alone in the bush. There's just too much risk. So we need to find ways to address these issues holistically. It's not just about creating the job opportunities. We also need to make sure that women's needs are considered in the formal sector. And there's a great example in the Solomon Islands. A tuna cannery, Sol Tuna, has 80% of the workforce are rural women. Supported by the IFC, they've invested in improving conditions for women employees and really turned around a major problem with absenteeism. So that sort of investment is necessary. To support opportunities in value adding and processing, support to women entrepreneurs is needed, and there's lots of opportunities there, but the needs are around technical and business training, seed capital, market access, digital tools, including e-commerce. These are all really essential elements. An area of opportunity that I've got particular interest in, and it's come up already multiple times, women's participation in STEM roles. But what I haven't heard so far is STEM including the agricultural sciences, which are critical to the blue and green sectors. So research and applied research is important, particularly in the shadow of the climate and biodiversity emergencies. Women can take their place here. Land Resources Division of the Pacific Community, where I work, so it's all agriculture and forestry, has a gender-balanced management team, but our researchers and senior technical staff, not at all balanced. Only 20% of our PhD holders are women. So we need to create these opportunities for women to undertake further study, provide the support that's necessary there, and then also the support that's necessary to move into these really critical roles for supporting agriculture and the greening of agriculture. And I think that's probably the last point I'd like to mention there is not all agriculture is the green economy. The vast majority of it isn't. So we need to be able to invest in those areas of research to help us green the whole of the agriculture sector.
Thank you, Karen. You've clearly outlined the reality out there. Thank you for pointing out the social, cultural issues and that holistic solutions are really needed. So definitely we need more support from government and other development partners. And that's what we'll focus on now. As I ask Helen, in 2014, Sweden became the first country to launch a feminist foreign policy. Would you tell us more about this approach and how you see it contributing to women's participation in the green economy?
Thank you, Mitzi, and hi to everyone. It's very nice and I'm honored to be part of this panel. But before answering your question, I just want to clarify that the feminist foreign policy was launched by the current government, which is now a caretaker government after the Swedish parliamentary elections on September 11th, resulting in a shift of majority. But the feminist foreign policy focuses on increasing gender equality, which in turn contributes to reduced poverty and more sustainable development, which is essential to greening of economies. The feminist foreign policy is a response to the discrimination and systematic subordination that women experience in everyday life, and it builds on Sweden's experiences and efforts at national and international level. In Sweden, 90% of men and 85% of women participate in the labor force. This is thanks to decades of social reforms such as access to child and elder care, free education for all, fight against discrimination and sexual harassment, reforms of parental leave, equal pay policies, and much more, just the things that Sam were talking about. There is overwhelming evidence also that gender equality boosts economic growth, and this is very much the case for Sweden. The feminist foreign policy is a perspective as well as a working method where the Swedish Foreign Service in all its parts strive to strengthen all women and girls' rights, representation, and resources based on the reality in which they live. It is a transformative agenda that aims to change structures and enhance the visibility of women and girls as actors. And 4 components have proven to be decisive for the policy's impact. First, leadership at the highest level and mainstreaming through all parts of the organization. And second, ownership by involving the entire Foreign Service in developing the actions, policies, and activities, as well as engaging in dialogue with civil society and other partners. Third, guidance on integrating gender equality in ordinary systems, processes, and responsibility structures, such as planning and monitoring, rules of procedure, and budgeting. And fourth, support. First by an ambassador for feminist foreign policy, which has a coordination team and focal points at all departments. So they are developing in collaboration with the whole organization, action plans, e-training, gender coach programs, thematic websites with good examples, fact sheets, and so forth. And another crucial component is sex and age disaggregated data to be able to perform gender analysis of policy proposals, resource allocation, and impact evaluation. So gender equality is a necessary precondition to succeed with the green shift for the entire population. Hence, we must work simultaneously on social reforms that will empower and include women in general, while also mainstreaming gender equality in policies, tools, programs, and investments aiming at greening our economies. As a result from the feminist foreign policy, we have substantially increased support to women's organizations and also adopted the strategy for gender equality in international development cooperation with around $100 million allocated from 2018 until this year. And to give you just an example of Swedish funded projects, I could mention Empower, Women for Climate Resilient Societies project. Its aim is to support women entrepreneurs using renewable energy for climate resilient livelihoods. This SIDA supported project works with women to drive a shift to renewables, recognizing that women are not without knowledge, skills, capacity, and ambition to effect changes in their communities. Women are the household energy managers, making decisions and maximizing utility from energy sources in the home. So women are also crucial links in Southeast Asia's agriculture value chain, where renewable energy can provide significant benefits. Over to you, Mitzi.
Thank you very much, Helen. You gave very good examples there of the important role of women in various areas and a great model there that Sweden sets for the rest of the world. And one of the areas you talked about is how women are also driving the shift to renewable energy. So I want to go over to Ajaita now. This is something you also focus on in your work at Frontiers Markets. Would you tell us more about your business model working with rural women in India?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Mitzi. Listening to everyone, I just want to first say that thank you so much for having me on this amazing panel and also giving the opportunity to kind of give the perspective in terms of how we see this in India in itself. Um, the context for us in India, of course, is that we have over 1.38 billion people that live in the country, and of which almost 75% live in rural parts of India. And I think that the biggest challenge that we've seen generally when we think about the disparity between people that live in urban versus rural is that you have 700,000 villages, of which you have almost 800 million plus people living in, that do not actually access quality services, whether it's about electrification, whether it's about consumer durables, whether it's about clean energy appliances and solutions. And that's a big problem when you start thinking about where you need access to quality solutions to be able to address the ability to climb the economic ladder in a way to create prosperity. Now, add to the layer, reiterating what everyone has already said, is that women participation and economic empowerment in the country is pretty bad. We only have about 25% participation of women in the labor force in general. And if you look at this in the context of rural, which is 51% women, it's not even 5%. And that's really been the key. How might we create job opportunities for rural women such that we're also being able to create access opportunities to get quality services and responsible solutions into rural areas at a mass scale? And that's really what Frontier Markets has done. We've been working in rural India for the last 10 years, focused on really understanding why women are a critical connect to better understand who the rural customer is, what rural families actually need, and how might we actually invest in her skilling, access to technology, access to capital, and actually bridge the gap between rural customers and our ability to drive solutions. We work with now today 30,000 rural women entrepreneurs who basically are living in the villages that we believe that we should be driving solutions to, who have now used our technology, which is a app, an e-commerce app. So I really do appreciate the comment that was made earlier about why e-commerce, market linkages, and capital is critical. So our women are actually using our e-commerce platform, which has been designed for them, by them, with them, to be able to help rural customers get access to information around how can they take on clean energy solutions in solar, how can they also create energy efficient solutions, how can we get involved in recycling and waste management, and they help bridge that gap. Ultimately, these women are not only creating impact in their rural villages because they're literally the game changers of carbon emission, but also getting the right solutions to market, but they're earning real money, they're getting real skills, and they're actually becoming game changers in how they operate. Today, 1 million families have been able to access all kinds of solutions in solar, clean cooking solutions, energy efficient products, now getting involved in recycling and waste management. And these women have been earning over $20 million of income in the last 5 years and building an opportunity to show that green jobs, in our definition, is not just renewable energy. It's actually also looking at energy efficiency. It's looking at circular economy. It's looking at waste management. And of course, understanding that 90% of this population are farmers. And how do you better influence them in their farming practices? So, again, really appreciate the comments from earlier to help look at sustainable ways to create climate impact at a very large scale, especially in a country like India.
Wow, Ajita, a lot that you've done in 10 years. Congratulations on all the successful work. And it's great to see how this has really empowered women in India. And we know a lot of the problems were exacerbated during COVID, but a lot of opportunities also arose. So COVID had a huge impact on the villages that you work in. How did you adapt to the emerging crisis given the disruption to supply chains? And how did you respond to the needs of the people in the villages that you work in?
I think it's a great question. And I think this is something that I sometimes feel like we undermined, right? When we talk about stats about women and the need for them to participate and the need for them to have an income opportunity, but we're not actually using the right framework around why they are assets in helping us understand the gaps on the ground. Look, women are influencers, they're community leaders. They literally know everything about what's going on the ground because they care in a way, frankly speaking, that men don't. And what we were able to do in response to COVID was please understand that the country went into a lockdown. You had mass migrations happening from the urban back to rural. So a family that has a woman who's responsible for, let's say, 7 people was suddenly responsible for 15. And ultimately, she was not being allowed to be participating in the economy. There was a lot of gender based violence, as we've already discussed earlier in the panel. But what was exciting was that she wanted to participate in helping bridge the gap. So at Frontier Markets, we've really embraced technology. We ensured that going from 2,000 women to 20,000 women get jobs. They were using the technology. They became call center women that were providing us data to understand where the challenges were, what were the supply chain gaps. And we actually, within a week of lockdown being announced in India, were operational because we had to just call the government and tell them that we can actually fix these problems in the 5,000 villages that we were operating in. And overnight, these women went from just selling clean energy products to bringing in agri solutions, to doing digital payments, to helping people get access to essential services, to coordinating vaccinations, to coordinating COVID related healthcare instructions, because they were the center in connecting to the rural families that were there on the ground. So ironically, as a company, we grew from 10,000 women entrepreneurs to 30,000, from 1,000 villages to 5,000, from 500,000 customers to 1 million customers, from being a company that was probably generating about, I think, $12 million of revenue to now $50 million of revenue, just by listening to the women entrepreneur being the center for solution design. Because she was skilled, she had the confidence, she had the agency, and most importantly, she had the technical know-how to help bridge the gap.
Oh, excellent. It's wonderful to see how these women really took a crisis and turned it around, pivoted to turn it into opportunities. So a lot of really great stories there. You can even read more about what's been happening at Frontier Market. Just search them online. You can read all about the excellent things they're doing. Now, let me go over back to Helen. Helen, you were Ocean Ambassador for Sweden, and you have extensive experience working on the green economy. Would you share your thoughts on how the blue economy can help advance gender equality?
Thank you, Mitzi. Well, first, I would like to say that the development of the blue economy holds both risks and opportunities when it comes to gender equality. What we are experiencing now is a race to the ocean with an increase in areas of use as well as intensity, and it's of historic proportion. The ocean economy is growing faster than the economy on average. And currently, it is mainly developed countries and big corporations benefiting from the blue economy, whilst the least developed countries are hardest hit by the negative impacts. So it's important to secure that the blue economy is not only environmentally sustainable, but also fair and inclusive. The ocean's health is, as you all know, severely threatened by carbon emissions, global warming, pollution, and overfishing. But ocean-based climate action could also deliver up to a fifth of the annual greenhouse gas emission cuts needed in 2050 to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And here I'm talking about ocean-based renewable energy, ocean-based transport, coastal and marine ecosystems, fisheries, aquaculture, and dietary shifts, and also carbon storage in the seabed. But maritime industry is one of the most male-dominated sectors next after mining. And according to estimates by the International Transport Workers, only 2% of the world's maritime workforce are made up of women. So efforts to promote gender equality and opportunities for women in offshore tech and male-dominated industry must be dealt with in a different way than in sectors such as sustainable aquaculture, blue carbon and coastal restoration, and tourism. But there are untapped potential for women in the blue economy if we improve gender equality in the tourism and fisheries sectors alone. Women in fisheries are often invisible, ignored, and unrecognized, even though they represent 47% of the global fisheries workforce, especially in post-harvest activities. Poor data systems lead to incorrect assumptions about the gender division of labor in fisheries, and this causes the role of women in fisheries to be overlooked. Innovation and technology are needed to support ocean and coastal restoration and protection, which are often community-led, and this is where we can also support women participation. Well, also now, as we see the blue industries and activities grow in the ocean and coastal areas, the need for marine spatial planning increases to secure cross-sectoral coordination and predictable conditions for industry investments. And it's crucial part when working with marine spatial planning. It's important to work with stakeholder consultations. And since many sectors are male dominated, it's important that the political processes and planning secures ways to include women in marine spatial planning. We cannot afford the blue economy to increase the gender gap. And finally, I just would like to stress the need to support and increase the number of women in ocean science. Data shows that globally, many fields of ocean science are still male dominated, in particularly ocean observation and ocean technology, with men representing 75% of the researchers. And in addition, there is a decreasing percentage of women with faculty rank. So there is a leaking pipeline where the number of women at later career stages is much lower proportion than those graduating. They are less likely to be funded for the research, and they represent only 24 to 34% of all marine conservation journal papers. So during the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, led by UNESCO IOC between 2021 and 2030, there is a great deal to be done on ocean science and inclusion of women. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Indeed, a great deal to be done. And that describes basically everything you said, describes generally other areas of conservation, be it forest, species. This is an area that we will now be hearing about from Robin James, who is the Gender and Equity Advisor for the Nature Conservancy's Asia Pacific Division. Robin has been working in conservation for over 2 decades, starting as a wildlife ranger in a very remote part of the Australian outback. Let's have a listen to Robin sharing experiences on the Nature Conservancy's work in supporting women to gain skills in non-traditional green jobs, specifically ranger jobs.
We know there are many barriers for women to undertake employment in the economy, and that is true for green jobs as well. For example, for rangers, less than 7.5% of ranger jobs globally are held by women. So at the Nature Conservancy, we're deliberately thinking about how to change that through understanding deep analysis of the communities we work with and our own workplace practices. We're working from China to Australia to Solomon Islands to really try and turn that around, where we've gone from, in many cases, 100% men ranger programs to now having women actively involved and paid to do conservation as rangers.
Great to hear success stories like that. And we're hearing a lot of similar stories also in agriculture. So I want to go over to you, Karen. Agriculture is the largest employer in the Pacific region for both men and women. This sector has huge potential for green job creation. Sustainable and climate resilient agriculture can be a source of income as well as contribute to food security and ensure efficient use of resources. Karen, would you tell us about your work promoting organic agriculture in the region, especially for women, and what further opportunities you see in this sector?
Thanks, Mitzi. Global markets for organic produce are just growing year on year. They're quite resilient to a lot of the global shocks that we see. And there's huge opportunities there for the Pacific, but there's also opportunities for local market growth. There's a renewed interest in healthy eating, recognition of some of the risks around chemicals. And on the back of some of the tourism opportunities that exist in some of our countries, we really could grow our local market for organics as well. We've also got, I guess, an opportunity that's got a little bit of impetus through the current fertiliser price increases. And that's the development of local biological inputs, the supportive industries around agriculture, also really provide some opportunities for the Pacific. Across the region, organic agriculture has really been growing. It's hard to get export data because there are no HS codes that separate out organic exports from conventional exports. So if coconut oil is exported, we can't see from the customs codes whether it's organically certified or not. But we do know that the amount of land certified and the number of farmers certified is growing. And in some countries, we know, and using coconut oil as an example again, that all of the exporters are organically certified, so you can assume that 100% of the oil going out is organic, and Samoa is a country that we can tell that from. So I guess that's the sort of global market opportunities and some of the local markets, but why specifically organics and women? And I guess there's growing evidence that shows that organic provides opportunities for women's empowerment in a way that industrial agriculture just doesn't. Women's involvement and gender equality in organic value chains is promoted through the advancement of smaller scale family farm models that have fewer mechanical processes and therefore a lower barrier to entry. You're not having to invest in a lot of equipment. The decrease in reliance on chemical inputs, the increased focus on crop diversity, food security, and quality nutrition over commodity crop production is something that attracts women to organic agriculture. The stronger attention to health, well-being, and the social implications, as well as fair trade working conditions, so better payment, price premiums, that type of thing, are also beneficial in bridging that, what we know as the wage gap between men and women. There's also a lot of space for innovative ideas coupled with environmental sustainability principles in organics. We refer to organic agriculture as a knowledge-based production system. Rather than relying on an external input, it's about understanding your farm systems, and that's how you address your production problems. Organic farming can also bring models a little bit closer to urban and suburban locations, and that helps increase accessibility to a wider population that includes women whose often their mobility is a little bit restricted, either through childcare or other issues. Women's participation also broadens and deepens organic and sustainable agriculture sector goals, emphasising a broader perspective on livelihoods and welfare that moves beyond the cash-based narrative of traditional economic principles. Profit's important to all farmers, of course, but women often interlink that profit with sustainability and with health outcomes. The regional organic movement, known as POACOM, which is housed in the Pacific community, has been implementing a program over the last few years supported by the Government of Australia called Building Prosperity for Women Producers in Organic Value Chains. And the project's been working with individuals and families, producers, vendors, and with organic governance structures to promote gender equality and achieve the overall goal of women having access to improved and sustainable livelihoods through participation in organic value chains. The project's developed a toolkit for building gender-sensitive value chains, and specific value chains have been selected for support in the Marshall Islands, Palau and Kiribati, and we're still working with FSM to decide what value chains they'll focus on. We also have a toolkit online for supporting policy development in the organic space, and that's been reviewed in a gender lens to help governments and stakeholders develop policies that not only support organics, but support an inclusive approach to organic development. And we've seen that implemented in 4 countries to date. We're receiving more requests for support in that area than we can handle. And at the moment, and it's quite rare in the Pacific to see agriculture policies that have gender indicators, but now we do. So I think that's a really huge step forward for the sector as a whole, not just organic. This work builds on innovations that have been happening over the past 10 years in organic certification for local markets. The type of certification we've been building is participatory. It's based on peer reviews. And we have a range of farmers groups certified in this way. And some examples from Fiji. We have whole islands, such as the Thivia, certified, and the women there are producing and selling virgin coconut oil. We also have a women's farmers group, the Fiji Organic Queens, who produce a range of fresh products, but also value-added products for local market. And a local NGO friend who has a farm-to-table restaurant with the organic food straight from their farms, but they also employ the local village women to cook traditional dishes. So there's got that value add of nourishment, I guess, of our traditional recipes being taken to the restaurant table. That group has also moved some of its suppliers into a third-party certification to export turmeric. So it's also a stepping stone for those who can then grow into the export market. Portcom's work on gender has meant that more women have moved in these certification systems from not only being producers, but moved into the governance roles. So they're making decisions around the certification system for the whole community. So it's had impacts on empowerment at various levels, which we're really happy about. Back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Wow, excellent examples. It's great to see how women, these examples of women being empowered, taking on more leadership and decision-making roles. And, here in the Philippines, the organic agriculture farming system is quite challenging. So we need to work on to take the cue from you. And we'd love to hear more about that later on. So we've discussed how persisting gender gaps in green skills will negatively impact women's path to green jobs. But access to green skills is only one barrier. Studies show that cultural and social norms were reported as the most common barrier. That's at 72%. And this is followed by a lack of gender-sensitive policies, which is 49%, and a lack of gender-sensitive training opportunities at 41%. So let me ask Sam now. Sam, how can we help female workers develop green skills?
Thank you, Mitzi. I mean, as you alluded with those statistics, it's really about addressing deep structural inequalities. So I think that, many programs are focusing on technical skills for women. But when we're talking about women in particular, the programs also need to go a bit further to support transition to jobs. So I think this means including working with employers to really understand their needs and helping them to break down gender biases, whether they be conscious ones or unconscious ones, that may be creating barriers to themselves hiring women. And for girls in particular, I think we need to create more opportunities for apprenticeships, paid internships, and scholarships. In other words, when we're investing in building women and girls' green skills, we also need to build in opportunities for them to actually apply those skills. And in terms of technical education and training aimed at building specific capabilities for green jobs, we need to, as you were saying, proactively address the underlying social and gender norms. So maybe one good example that I can cite from a different region is the Tajikistan Strengthening Technical and Vocational Education and Training project that ADB has been supporting. And that proactively addresses women's limited engagement in non-traditional but high-paying occupations. And the project intentionally targets female enrollment in non-traditional courses. And this is done through extensive social marketing to encourage parents and communities to send girls to train in these non-traditional occupations, provision of stipends to support these girls' study costs in these non-traditional occupations, creating dedicated female sections in dormitories for study, increasing the number of female teachers in these courses and the number of women in the management of these institutions. So it's really a holistic approach and tackling it at all levels. So I hope this project example illustrates in a nice, succinct way the need to go beyond providing women with skills, and that you really need to tackle the structural changes that lead to the gender segmentation in STEM industries in the first place and other related fields. We also need to expand green skills beyond STEM to include women's leadership to thrive. And I think Aijita's example before really shows that when you invest in women in this way and provide them with, the skills, the technology, and the leadership and the confidence, you can really see them soar. So back to you.
Exactly, Sam. Well said. I agree. As it was Ajaita who said it earlier, women just have a different lens, really, from men, and we just have to give them a voice and opportunities. And you've all given clear examples and cases for how to do that. So let me go over now to you, Dave. Dave, what can business do to upskill and reskill workers, in particular women?
Right, Mitzi. So two main initiatives come to mind. So first, I'd say that businesses can invest more in upskilling opportunities. And so based on LinkedIn's data, we're seeing that the most successful job transitions are enabled by what we refer to as high skill similarity or high skill overlap. And so this suggests upskilling and reskilling are already playing a huge role in the green transition. So, what that means is it's important, really important for businesses to take a skills-first approach in hiring. Drilling down a little bit further on this, our data shows that workers who transitioned into green jobs exhibited a 59% similarity in skills between their previous non-green job and their current green job. Another insight I'll point out from our data is that workers who transitioned into greening jobs exhibited a 66% similarity in skills between their previous non-greening job and their current greening job. And while we found that while employees say opportunities to learn and grow is the #1 driver of great work culture, only 52% of employees feel their manager encourages the use of work time to learn new skills. So there's a bit of a missed opportunity there for employers and businesses. And I'll just highlight that on LinkedIn's platform, we're investing pretty heavily in skills first products to help our members showcase their skills, upskill through LinkedIn learning products, and help companies hire based on skills. Now, the second initiative that comes to mind is businesses should really improve company practices and policies to support women. I think this dovetails with what Sam was mentioning. So we know that the problems are systemic, which means we need a systemic response. And our data shows that there are 3 key components where we must do more for women. First, companies need to focus on internal mobility for women. And so an example is this could include creating targeted mentoring programs, hothouse programs for women working at the pre-manager level in particular, as well as increasing awareness and training about unconscious bias for hiring managers and interviewers at this level. Second, businesses should implement inclusive hiring practices to help companies recruit and retain female talent. Employers can help level the playing field by making sure they have balanced hiring slates, removing any bias from job descriptions, and no longer asking for prior salaries to reduce the impact of starting salary negotiations, and lastly, making sure both women and men are on the interviewing panels. Lastly, I'll point out that companies need to have more flexible work policies. So LinkedIn data shows that women are 24% more likely than men to apply to remote roles, and that underscores the importance of flexibility to women and the role it plays in making workplaces equitable. Flexible working needs to be normalized to attract a diverse talent pool and offered to all workers, not just women. Mitzi?
Thank you, Dave. A lot of great points there. And it's interesting you mentioned training needed on just making people aware about this, this basically our conscious, our this certain biases. I think this is all part of the education efforts we also need to do. We're not aware of these biases and therefore reinforce certain stereotypes. So good to have all kinds of training in that regard. And another aspect we're also looking at, of course, is upscaling or empowering women in the energy sector. So let's get some perspective now on how best to support female clean energy entrepreneurs from Danny Kennedy, who is CEO of New Energy Nexus. New Energy Nexus connects entrepreneurs to capital to build an abundant clean energy economy that benefits all. New Energy Nexus is a global platform organization for funds and incubators with chapters in the USA, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, Uganda, and India. Let's watch this.
3 quick ideas on how best to support female clean energy entrepreneurs from New Energy Nexus's experience. I'll say we have to get over our biases. Clearly, we've got problems. Venture capitalists have left most of the value on the table by investing mostly in men, and mostly white men, like 90% of the time in the recent history. So we've got to get past that. But even more importantly, structurally, if you're managing other people's money, employ women capital allocators. Women and female fund managers are going to simply do better at picking the winners that are generated by female innovators, inventors, entrepreneurs, and others. And the third thought, from our experience building women in energy entrepreneurship in India and other programs around the globe, is women are rarely told they can be owners of businesses and starters of great game-changing companies. So give them lots of ladders of opportunity into incubators and accelerators to come up with ideas, and the networks and confidence to believe that they're meant to be there as part of the program to create the game-changing companies that are going to drive the clean energy transition.
There you go, Danny Kennedy summarizing in 3 very succinct points how to support female entrepreneurs. And a question now, this time on women's entrepreneurship, this time for Ajaita. Women's green entrepreneurship is growing around the world, as we've been discussing, but many obstacles remain, that's clear, and men still outnumber women to getting startup support and business ownership, which Danny mentioned. East Asia and the Pacific has the second largest share of women's business ownership at 47%, yet South Asia ranks the lowest globally at 18%. So Ajaita, as a female green and social entrepreneur, what are some of the challenges you have encountered along the way, and what do you think needs to change to better support women like you?
Thank you so much for that question. And I'm just smiling because, of course, I think everything that Danny said was critical. And I think that New Energy Nexus's work is just fantastic to kind of support entrepreneurs like us. So I think that there's a couple of major barriers that even I still face. We don't in South Asia, unfortunately, have policies around supporting the concept of social business. So today, if you look at this in the perspective of Europe, or if you look at the perspectives in East Asia, or even in America, you have the concept of a B Corp, which ultimately gives incentives for the organizations that are actually trying to create impact while also building profitability in a way that's uniquely different than the nonprofit structure or the for-profit commercial business. In South Asia, unfortunately, there's no norms there. So we end up having to be sort of an orphan child around the work that we're trying to accomplish, recognizing that it takes much longer. There's a lot more risk. There's a lot more, you need a lot more resilience or appetite to be able to deal with the norms. If you just look at India in the last decade of working here, we've gone through everything from policy changes to demonetization to GST shifts to then COVID. And when you're working with vulnerable communities and you're working with rural women, you can imagine that you have to have the appetite to be able to invest further, take larger risks. But where's the capital, or where's the policy that supports that? And I think, unfortunately, there's a big gap there. Secondly, I think that, as discussed already with what everyone has said, women do need a different level of a support system, a platform, a confidence, also risky capital. If you look at most of the startups in the country of India, also myself included, we end up bringing impact investors at an early stage, but we also end up diluting ourselves as owners of our own businesses. Today, 90% of women that own their own companies that are working in this space own less than 30% of their business, even though they've raised under $10 million of capital. That's a really big problem if you start thinking about incentives in the future to be able to continue doing this work, because you have to invest 10, 15, 20 years in really building the right economy at scale. Last thing I'll say is that generally, I think that we need our own platforms. As much as I believe that, our work is known by the universe, the reality is that it's not. And I think that in order for women to get invested in more effectively, myself included, we need access to those larger checks. We need access to blended capital. where grant funding, venture funding, debt funding can come in a very different way. But also, we need to be seen as the smart bet. And I think this is probably the largest challenge, I'll say, is that for whatever reason, we as women entrepreneurs tend to have to justify our existence in a very formidable and intense way that I think our counterparts do not. We end up having to back up our numbers, practicality of our data, profitability in a way that I think that our male counterparts do not. So somewhere we need to understand where platforms like the ministries, like places in Europe and others that are actually putting capital in the development space can actually make it a point to say that women entrepreneurs like myself and the few that actually are surviving or thriving deserve access to cheap capital, fast capital, and long-term capital in a way that I think would be a game-changing opportunity for us to create the impact that we know we're able to create.
Thank you, Ajaita. Well said. What you described, this is the same thing I'm seeing here in the Philippines. I've been starting some work and research on the organic agriculture and permaculture field in the Philippines. And what I'm seeing, and I'm sure it's happening in many other countries too, that in the Philippines, largely agriculture is seen as a man's profession, as it is around the world. And many of the things that women do are largely undervalued or invisible. And basically, women in many communities, women in farming are seen as they're considered mere assistants or subordinates to their husband or to maybe a male relative in the family. So what they do is considered merely a household chore, so they go unpaid. And also, what we fail to see is the role that women play in every part of the state, in every stage of farming. So this is from whether it's the other parts of the value chain all the way to marketing. So again, women just really need a voice. And what's happening is another significant part that's being overlooked is women as keeper of traditional knowledge. So I want to go over now to Karen to discuss this point of traditional knowledge. So women have a lot of knowledge on techniques, perhaps in farming, and sadly, a lot of this is now dying because it's not being passed on to younger generations, these traditional knowledge and skills. So Karen, rural women from developing countries are still the keepers of seed biodiversity and knowledge of sustainable agricultural practices, among other things. Yet there is a tendency to look at green economy solutions as those that require new technology. Often we ignore traditional knowledge. Would you share some examples of how green jobs in the agriculture sector can incorporate women's traditional knowledge and skills and contribute to innovation and green jobs at the same time?
Absolutely. But first, Mitzi, I'd just like to reinforce what you said. There is the idea that men are farmers and women help on farms. And that lack of, or that invisibility of women's work in agriculture is something we really, really need to address. Critical players, not just assistants. But back to the topic I meant to be talking about. Traditional knowledge and things like holding the understanding of the biodiversity in community is just essential. And that, again, comes back to organic agriculture as an example. It brings together the best of traditional science and practice with new technology. It also holds biodiversity at its core. And as you said, women are the holders of this type of knowledge. The knowledge of what plants to grow together for pest control, for example, is really critical in ensuring that your farm is productive. So to have women as the lead farmers and applying that knowledge is really powerful and really beneficial for food security and for the environment. This type of knowledge could also be used to develop industries like biological inputs and soil amendments, but also traditional medicine is important, and there's opportunities there for taking the knowledge that women hold in traditional medicine and traditional healing for development of nutraceuticals or pharmaceuticals. I think it would be really interesting to create a new set of roles in traditional science, where cultural knowledge holders work alongside the new science researchers to solve challenges together, bringing the best of both of those sources of knowledge onto the very pressing problems that we have in the globe. Another area where traditional knowledge and skills could be applied is in the product development in cultural industries. Artisans using traditional materials in new ways or new designs. And there's an organisation in Fiji called Rise Beyond the Reef, which has taken Fijian handicrafts to what could be described as a boutique level, working with designers to use those traditional skills in new ways. Value adding for food is another area where there's a lot of traditional knowledge in communities in the Pacific and across the globe. Traditional preservation techniques. The North Pacific, Kosrae Chuk, women have been using traditional practices for managing food security through drought and cyclone seasons by drying and fermenting breadfruit, for example. This supports food security. Those sort of skills could be applied and developed commercially. And it's not always thinking about the export market. When we have a cyclone in the Pacific and food aid is shipped in, usually what comes in is not our food, it's rice. We don't eat a lot of rice in the Pacific. But if we were to develop some of those traditional skills and learn how to preserve them for ways that could be shipped safely to other areas, we could be providing our own food in response to disasters. So I think there's lots of things that we could think about in that space. But just as important as what the opportunities are is how they're offered or supported. Pacific communities work together. We get organised. We have village committees and women's groups, and we do things as communities. And research has really shown in the Pacific that collectives of various sorts support members to increase productivity, protect their income, and improve working conditions. And critically, women's participation in collectives also facilitates women's safety, leadership, and the collective voice to advocate for their economic needs and priorities and for our rights. So collectives serve as sites for women to gather and work to improve economic and social situation of their members. They can be also the place that training is delivered, for example. Benefits are often distributed amongst the groups, and the groups have a better bargaining power on price. Through increased access to credit, market information, education and training, and of course, improved technologies as a means of saving, women increase their income and build their businesses and expand their social networks, getting a level of security, which can't happen in our context on an individual level, or it's harder for it to happen on an individual level. Confidence I've heard mentioned several times tonight, and that collective can also build confidence and agency, which is really critical. So there's strong evidence that supporting women's organisations is a really effective way to build women's economic empowerment in the region. And if we're going to take all that traditional knowledge and apply it in different ways, working with the collectives who are the custodians of that would be a really powerful tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Wonderful. I love what you said about the power of communities is collective power, and supporting women, as we say, it takes a village, right? So working together really does accomplish more, and it helps build confidence and really empower everyone. Now, I want to go over to Helen. Helen, you've talked about the potential of working with local communities to protect and manage ocean resources and create jobs for women in the blue economy at the community level. Would you tell us about the Blue Action Fund, which was created by Germany and co-funded by Sweden and others? And would you also please share some examples of how the fund is supporting women at the community level?
Thank you, Mitzi. Well, the Blue Action Fund supports projects to establish and to improve management of marine protected areas, while also supporting sustainable livelihoods in local communities in developing countries. The projects are developed and implemented by national and international NGOs. It strengthens the synergies between the agenda for biodiversity protection, climate change adaptation, coastal resilience, poverty eradication, and food security. And the fund fills a critical gap since SDG 14 is the least funded of all sustainable development goals. The Blue Action Fund is committed to gender equality and women empowerment, and the Blue Action programs strive to ensure that all funded projects are gender responsive, that women have equal access to project resources and information, equal opportunities to participate in and benefit from the Blue Action supported activities. So the fund is committed to ensure that funded projects are designed, implemented, monitored, and evaluated with a gender-responsive lens and are informed by data disaggregated by gender, among others. So a gender guide has been developed to support grantees, local communities, and program staff. And all projects have gender components and reports on issues such as the share of women in leadership roles, the percentage of women participating in trainings, percentage of grant recipients, and, for example, activities such as female-only discussion groups. And some project partners have specialized sub-grantees or consultants, like, for example, Flora and Fauna International collaborates with Children and Women Development Center in Cambodia. So the Blue Action Fund welcomes such collaboration between environmental and social NGOs, which gives the fund higher confidence that the gender issue is properly addressed. Similarly, the fund has started to request gender action plans from all grantees working with ecosystem-based adaptation, a program co-funded with the Green Climate Fund. But to give you an example of a project, Blue Action is supporting a project led by RARE that aims to sustain small-scale coastal fisheries and conserve marine ecosystems by working in partnership with the Mozambican government to establish a community-led approach to fisheries management and strengthen financial resilience in local fishing communities. The project is working with coastal fishing communities to reduce post-harvest loss and increase the value of existing fisheries. In parallel, financial inclusion measures are helping people retain and manage and augment their incomes. So 36 saving clubs have been supported by the project, which have a total of 992 members. 68% of them are women. And they have collectively saved over $270,000 so far. And these savings increase financial stability and social security and allows fishing households to make decisions based on their long-term interests rather than the short-term pressures that can compel overfishing.
Thank you very much, Helen. Definitely, to get that kind of action in other parts of the world, we really need a lot of policy government support to get that going. So this brings me to Dave. Dave, we started with you presenting the data from your report, and you also presented some recommendations. Would you share some of the key recommendations to policymakers, businesses, and workers?
Absolutely, Mitzi, and thanks for the question. And I'll start by saying that the scale of the challenge we face is going to require both public and private sector action if we're going to meet our global climate targets. But with that said, three recommendations from our research come to mind. So first, there should be more focus on building gender equal workforces across traditional and emerging industries. Our data shows that the sectors with the biggest demand for green skills globally are corporate services, manufacturing, energy and mining, public administration, and construction. As we reimagine traditional roles, we should also consider the additional challenge for women that some of these jobs are in sectors that women have traditionally been excluded from. So to reiterate the point made earlier, some additional support structures I think are called for. Second, emphasis should be placed on incorporating cross-cutting green skills into nearly all jobs. Our data shows that most green skills are being used in jobs that aren't traditionally thought of as green. So it's not just solar panel installers and wind turbine technicians, it's also fleet managers, data scientists, and healthcare workers. The fastest growing green skills we see are in the ecosystem management, environmental policy, and pollution prevention roles. And for workers to remain competitive in their roles, they'll need to learn the relevant green skills for their respective roles. And policy makers in particular should consider how this type of upskilling should be part of their workforce development and climate change investments. Lastly, I'll point out that we think there should be focus on working to upskill incumbent workers with targeted support for women. They can provide investment into training, particularly for women, including empowering and fostering entrepreneurship. And as industries become greener, workers in those industries will need to gain new skills. While the broader education ecosystem has an important role to play, as shared by fellow panelists, we must also upskill the existing workforce in addition to preparing the workforce of the future to meet the demand for the green skills.
Thank you very much, Dave. We have a lot of work ahead of us. And as you said, we really need the collaboration between the public and private sector. So we've had a very, very interesting discussion so far. I have learned so much. And I think we are coming to the close of this discussion. Now, I'd like to ask all of you, our panelists, following our discussion today, what do you think are the key opportunities to promote women's participation in the green economy, and what needs to happen immediately to accelerate progress? So there's 2 points there. Let me repeat that. What do you think are the key opportunities? Number one, to promote women's participation in the green economy, and number two, what needs to happen immediately to accelerate progress? Let's begin with Ajaita. Muted? Can you?
Sorry, can you? I think that
Yes.
based on
Okay,
the
we can hear you.
conversations that we've had, based on the conversations that we've had today, I think there's a very large alignment around the opportunity in looking at green jobs and women in a much larger context, especially when it comes to rural. I'll take a step back and not look at this just with India, but also looking at this in general when we look at the developing market. And I think that the agri sector is a massive one. I could not agree more with Karen around the fact that even today, where we operate, we have over 100 million women that are actively responsible for making consumption decisions as well as responsible for making farming decisions in their family. And if we're able to invest in their skilling and their ability to access the right capital, there's a huge opportunity to actually impact in climate, but also create green jobs. I also believe that there's a massive opportunity in looking at circular economies, looking at waste management, and of course, looking at the role that renewable energies will play when it comes to appliances, and again, linking that to the practice of where the larger population lives. One thing I'll reinforce is that while I want to be clear that I do not believe that it's the 7 billion people that created this havoc in terms of the climate challenge, but I do believe that the development sector and the folks that are living in these rural areas across the globe will be instrumental in actually making that change. And I think the women will be the central game changer or influencer in actually making that happen. What we need to make that happen is invest in them, see them, include them, and of course, skill them and give them the opportunity to make this happen at scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajaita. Definitely a smart investment to invest in women. Thank you for that. Now let's go over to Karen.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I just agree with everything that was just said. We need to make women's work in the green economy visible. When it's visible, then we know what has to happen next. And just a very brief example, several years ago, I was looking at some training data from a safe pesticide use training, and no women attended. And so I asked my team why not, and was told because the women aren't the farmers, the men are. So I pushed. I said, what is the women's role? And they said, well, they help. How? And as we went through all the ways women helped on the farms, there was about 6 points from weeding to harvesting to post-harvest where women were exposed to pesticides. So it became obvious that women were farming and they needed access to that knowledge as well. So that visibility of what women do is a really important trigger for everything else that needs to happen. The other thing that I think is really critical is to make sure that we're addressing the social norms and gender inequality in general, if we don't, and we are only focusing on the green jobs, we could actually do more harm than good for women in their home environment and in society. So there's a couple of, I guess, warnings around that. The last thing that I think is important across the board is that access to STEM education and training, but also then the employment pathways and any additional support that we need to put in place to ensure that women then have the opportunities and the career paths to follow on from that education.
Thank you, Karen. Education, employment opportunities, visibility is so important. And that's why I think sessions like this are really crucial in getting these stories out, getting that information out, this sharing of knowledge and experiences. It's really a way to give a voice to these women and make sure they are visible. So storytelling is also key in empowering them. Now, let's go over to Helen.
Yeah, I think we really need, and this is something that could be done immediately, systematic work to adopt and apply gender analysis and guidelines, as well as using impact indicators in resource allocations and project funding, for example, by the MDBs, by National Development Corporation agencies, and private institutions as well. And for that, we also need gender disaggregated data in national accounts and elsewhere. And as we have talked a lot about, we need to secure education, training, and upskilling on equal terms for women and girls. And we need to secure representation by women in political process and policy development on green and blue growth and transition. We also, I mean, what the private sector can do immediately is also to secure safe and acceptable working conditions for women in the blue and green economy. And finally, I would like to say that I guess you have all heard, you know, people stating that behind every successful man, there is a woman. And a couple of years ago, I was at a conference at the World Maritime University, Women in the Maritime Sectors. And all the female speakers witnessed about the importance about having the support of their spouse in the unpaid homework and to have support for career development, etc. So I think we need to put the limelight also on the benefits for men in a more equal society and an equal economy. The benefits for men, the benefits for businesses, and the benefits for the economy as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. You explained there very perfectly how women hold up half the sky. Therefore, we need to really work on equal access, equal opportunity for them. Now, can we hear from you now, Dave?
Sure, and while I'm conspicuously the only male on the panel, I am the father of 2 little girls, so I often think about how we can build an equitable future and promote women's participation in all aspects of the economy. And in order to meet our global climate targets, we really need to ensure we close the green gender gap. So with all that said, from my perspective and based on what I see at LinkedIn, I think promoting skills first hiring will really lead to more equitable outcomes. So we need to encourage companies, employers to hire based on skills, not on traditional qualifications like degrees and previous companies they work for, et cetera, or demographics. And I'll highlight that LinkedIn has recently rolled out new features on our platform, and we see that skills first mindset to hiring by employers brings about more equitable outcomes. And I'll highlight that hiring managers who use skill features to search for candidates within our products are 60% more likely to make a hire than those who don't. And then lastly, I'll point out that LinkedIn recently started highlighting to job seekers not only the skills required for each job post, but also when their skills match. And we found that this skill qualification transparency encouraged more women who typically set a higher self-qualification bar for themselves to apply to the jobs. So the increase in women applying was 1.8x greater than we observed in men, with a similar impact on hiring outcomes. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dave. Very useful insights there for a lot of kids who are now going off to college, deciding what they're going to study, and graduates on how to improve themselves for better employability. And I'd like to say it is so important to have men here in the room, because that's what it takes, right? All of us working together to make sure we achieve a successful transition to green and blue economy. So thank you, Dave. All men out there, we need to work together. Thanks for being here. And now over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Mitch. You know, it's always challenging to be the last one. Everyone has been saying so much good stuff, and I agree with everything that's been said there. So I guess to try to sum it up, I mean, I think that given the climate change challenges out there, I think we can all agree that we need to maximize the human capital available to solve these challenges. And that means that we have to make women's role visible. We need to make their contribution visible. We have to give them voice, and we also have to invest in them to give them the right skills for this transition. We also, at the same time, want to make sure that women don't lose out in terms of employment opportunities because of the rapid changes that are going on. So I guess following on from what I've been saying, I think that the key urgent opportunities are a real conscious intent to develop policies and programs that focus on STEM and transition to work for women and girls, with a focus on the social norm change. I mean, those are the kinds of things that Cam was talking about. We need a holistic approach. And I think in order to do that, maybe one thing that hasn't been mentioned is I think it's really important for closer collaboration between the education sector and climate change related sectors to ensure a gender responsive and inclusive approach going forward. And maybe just one last thing, the entrepreneurship piece, I think that's also been spoken about a lot, and Ajita made a very strong case for that. And I think that's also really important to invest in, both from the public and private sector side. And I think that my favorite quote from this session has probably been that investing in women is a smart bet. So over to you. Thank you, Mitzi.
Thank you very much, Sam. Definitely collaboration is key, and that's what we've been hearing from all you've been saying today. And we have to continue to work together to really make sure that we achieve these ambitious goals. So let me just wrap up some of the highlights from today's session. We heard from Dave Woodward from LinkedIn that we are falling short in developing the human capital we need to make the transition to a green economy, and that there is a gender gap related to skills and women filling those new green jobs. And from ADB's Chief of Gender Equality, Samantha Hong, she highlighted how the removal of barriers can support women to enter those green jobs, including addressing long-standing barriers to women's labor market participation. And to build a pipeline of women to enter those jobs, we need to invest in STEM education for girls. Very important. That was stressed by everyone here. Karen Mapusua from the Pacific community shared some very practical examples of how women are engaging in green jobs and gaining skills to participate in climate resilient agriculture. And Helen Agren from the Swedish Ministry of Environment highlighted how her government's feminist policies are contributing to gender equality around the world, including in supporting women to participate in the green and blue economy at the community level. And from Ajita Shah, who leads Frontiers Markets, we heard of the potential that the renewable energy transition holds for female entrepreneurs, including those that have in the past not been able to access capital to start their own businesses. So it's clear that addressing gender inequalities must be prioritized in all sectors, from generating greater support and capital for women entrepreneurs to start green businesses or participate in the green and blue economy, to working with the education sector to ensure that girls are given the same opportunities as boys, while breaking down barriers for women to access green jobs and generate the human resources needed for green, inclusive, and resilient economic recovery in the region. It has been an incredibly interesting discussion, and I have really learned a lot here, and I'm so interested to learn more. And this discussion is one that has not only illustrated the challenges, but some of the possible ways to continue to support a better future for women and girls in the Asia and the Pacific region. And that means a better future for boys and men too, of course. You may scan the QR code on your screens that will appear later on to rewatch our session on women in the green economy and to participate in other annual meeting sessions. Thank you once again to our panelists, to Dave Woodward of LinkedIn, Helen Agren from the Swedish Ministry for the Environment, Karen Mapusua of the Land Resources Division of the Pacific Community, Ajayita Shah of Frontiers Market India, and Samantha Hong of ADB's Gender Equality Thematic Group. And thank you all of you, for joining us today in this session. Have a good afternoon. Stay safe and well.